And then what you don't anticipate is step 6, which is lions and tigers and bears. Oh my. They will come out in the form of brick walls and scary moments where you begin to question yourself. And eventually you'll get through those lions and tigers and bears, and you're just about to open the door and unlock what's on the other side. And you feel like you are home free. And you realize you do not have the key to the door, that there's one more lesson, inevitably, that you have yet to learn.
Well, hello and welcome to this episode of the Terri Cole Show. I'm interviewing a friend, Dr. Elisa Hallerman, on her brand new book called Soulbriety, a plan to heal your trauma, overcome addiction, and reconnect with your soul. And I really do feel like this is a perfect time for this kind of book. If you are seeking more meaning in your life, if you're the pandemic may have hit you hard or hit you a particular way. And of course, if you suffer from addiction at all, this book, Soulbriety, it reimagines healing and recovery for anyone who is suffering or ready to live a life fueled with a deeper purpose by incorporating depth psychology, archetypal psychology, and the power of imagination. Soulbriety, which is actually a methodology that Dr. Elisa Hallerman came up with herself, is a unique and intentional modality to care for your soul on an ongoing basis, allowing tragedy, pain, and discourse to be reconfigured into wisdom and personal achievement. I really hope that you enjoy this interview with Dr. Hallerman as much as I enjoyed interviewing her. I am super excited to welcome Dr. Elisa Hallerman to the show. Hi, friend. How are you?
Hi, Terri. How are you? Thank you so much for having me, and it's so fun seeing you.
I know. All right, here we are. So let's move into something super exciting, that you have a brand new book. So I want to talk about this. It's something I'm super interested in because I myself am in recovery. You're in recovery. Gabby's, we're all in recovery.
Yeah.
Soulbriety, heal your trauma, overcome addiction, and reconnect with your soul. And this drops on December 6th, but people can buy it now. So you guys, pre-order right now before December 6th. Tell me what inspired you to write this book.
After I had left my career in the entertainment business, prior to that, actually, I had started taking classes when I started to have a crisis of meaning in my 40s and with what I was doing. And I made a list of the things that I ever wanted to do or that I loved. And one of the things was I want to learn more about addiction. I want to be of service to other women. And I want to be an ER doctor. And I know, and it was a very long list. Those are the only 3 I remember. And basically I thought, okay, it's just an exercise. What are some tiny little right actions I could take towards each one of these things? So I started Googling prerequisites to take my MCATs. And then I remembered that the reason I became a lawyer was because I was terrible at math and science. And so these prerequisites were unlikely going to happen. But I had stumbled upon this class at UCLA where you could get your drug and alcohol counseling license. And I thought, oh, that sounds really interesting. So I started taking those classes at night while I was still an agent. And that really opened my world up to education again. And that learning and that deep dive of curiosity as to what else was out there really started to pull that thread more and more. Cut to, I did retire and went back to school again, got my master's and doctorate in something called depth psychology, DEPTH. And that is a deep belief in the unconscious. And under depth psychology is Jungian psychology, archetypal psychology, all fall under that tradition. And essentially, when I set out to write my dissertation, the dissertation question was, could doing soul-centered work lead to long-term recovery from addiction? And the answer from all my participants was a resounding yes. But the caveat was they didn't know that they were doing it. They didn't know that they were caring for their soul. They didn't know they were going through a dark night of the soul. They didn't know that they were accessing soul. And it's because we don't have the language for that. That's when I started the concept of Soulbriety, really working on myself, which I had done throughout grad school, and then with my clients. And then it was during the pandemic where there was such a desperation and so much anxiety and depression, and so many young people suffering from addiction and suicidal ideation, and just countless everyone I spoke to. And I recognized that I couldn't help as many people as I possibly wanted to. And that's when I just felt very called to write the book so that I could get the message out to more people than I could actually personally one-on-one work with.
That was my exact reasoning for writing a book too, where you're like, and it's not just that you're sick of saying the same thing. It's that, I mean, that too. But you desperately want to be able to reach people who will never be able to be in your practice or could never take a course with you, you know? So that's amazing. So tell me a little bit about what Soulbriety actually is, because this is a methodology that you have created and that you share about in the book for folks getting sober.
I think it's important to note Soulbriety is for anyone who is lacking meaning, deep meaning and purpose in their life. Now, that can be from addiction, it can be from some sort of trauma or mental health issue, but it's really for everyone. And essentially, I start with defining what soul means for you. Soul is not something that you can point to or wrap your arms around. There's no one definition. It can't be taught in words alone. So for me, it became soul was the essence of who I am. It was my unique way of showing up in this world. It was my meaning making machine. It's something that felt very absolute and genuine and certain. And it had a felt sense to it of home and peace and awe. And it required enormous curiosity and being comfortable sitting in the dark in my suffering and waiting for those moments of wisdom and those pearls to get alchemized my pain into purpose.
And that clearly happened.
That it works. So, yeah, and then I talk about in the book figuring out where you are on your own soul journey. So, at Pacifica Grad School, where I went to school, is home of the archives of all of Joseph Campbell's writings. And I know, right? You just have to touch your heart when you say Joseph Campbell, don't you?
The
Joseph
best.
Campbell. Yeah, and in his book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, what he really did as one of the most profound mythologists of our time is he connected the dots that in every great myth, there is a hero and there is a hero's journey. So much so that when George Lucas was writing Star Wars, he called upon him to help build the characters. And you'll see, and I knew this from working in Hollywood for so many years, that you'll see in all of these great movies that where they have legs and they last forever and they cross countries and languages and so on, that they all have these archetypal figures. And essentially, that is the concept of the soul journey, that we are all on this sort of 12-step soul journey that I talk about in the book. And knowing where you are on the soul journey really helps to dissipate the fear and anxiety. Isn't it gorge?
Yeah. I'm sorry. For those listening, I'm holding up the book because it's beautiful. Those on YouTube can see it. But go ahead.
Yeah.
So I'm just looking at what you're talking about. I love it.
Yeah, and so essentially the first step is that we're just in our ordinary life. We're just walking through our ordinary life, la 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 la, going through the motions. I'm going to work, I'm coming home, I'm having dinner, I'm putting on Netflix, I'm taking the kids to school, whatever it is. And then we hear these little whispers. And they're very big questions. For me, they were, do I like my job? Do I want to live here anymore? Do I love this person? Really big questions that you're like, shush, 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 not now. Too big, too complicated, just going through my ordinary life just fine. We're just going to ignore that. And the thing about soul is those whispers do not go away. They will become louder and louder and louder until a brick house falls on your head and you are forced to stay still and listen, right? So let's say you don't turn away. Let's say you go into the question, you go into the whisper. Next, what will happen is some guides will appear in the form of a book, in the form of a friend. When we were coming on today, I was thinking about the time, I don't know if you remember this, but I was looking to do something else. I was looking for answers or more questions. And I came and I saw you and I met at your apartment and we sat on your couch and I didn't even know what the hell I wanted to talk to you about. You just had something I wanted to have and I didn't even know what that was. And people like that will show up. I didn't have to know what I wanted. I just had to know that you were someone that had something, a light or something that I wanted, and it was possible for you, and I needed to understand that. And then eventually you'll take a leap of faith. That's your fifth step. And when you take that leap of faith, you're like, okay, great, I'm in. I'm on my way. And then what you don't anticipate is step 6, which is lions and tigers and bears. Oh my.
Oh my.
Oh my. And they will come out in the form of brick walls and speed bumps and scary moments where you begin to question yourself. And eventually you'll get through those lions and tigers and bears and you'll get to the threshold and you're just about to open the door and unlock what's on the other side and you feel like you are home free. And you realize you do not have the key to the door. That there's one more lesson, inevitably, that you have yet to learn. And this is a deep one, but you're ready because you've gone through these trials and tribulations. And that is when the moment of truth happens. And then you can sit in that and begin to alchemize that pain into purpose and then have your moment of aha, that enlightenment, if you will. And then go back, and the ultimate challenge becomes about sharing your wisdom with others. Essentially why I wrote the book, Soulbriety.
Beautiful. What I was going to say about, I remember when you came to my apartment and we had similar but different paths. And I think part of what resonated with you was that I had left entertainment basically at the height of my career when I was running the East Coast branch of a talent agency. Supermodels, celebrities, like that's what I was doing.
Yes.
So in a way, it was the hardest time to leave. And yet it's the same way that I stopped drinking, where I stopped drinking my senior year of college because I was like, if I could stop now, I guess I could stop, right? Like there's going to be no good time.
Right.
And it's funny. I remember we sat down on my couch, we had a cup of tea and we were just talking. And I think you make such a great point about how you'll be attracted to someone for a reason. There's books will fall off the shelf, as Gabby likes to say, like on your head, like things will happen if you're awake enough and when you're in enough pain. Because for me, it took me being kind of on my knees with entertainment and being like, this cannot be my dharma. Like there has to be something more meaningful I can be doing. And yet all the fear, exactly as you lay it out in your book, in the steps where you're going to go forward and then you're like terrified, but then I'm going to be broke. Can I be broke? What's going to happen if I'm broke? And then you're like, okay, I guess I'm going to be broke and it's going to be fine. Moving forward, hitting walls and sitting with the truth, at least for me, there was like that moment of, what am I willing to do to be who I know I can be in this world? And that was not just about sobriety, and your book is not just about sobriety. That was about soulbriety. Who
Mm-hmm.
am I? And I
Yes.
love the way that you walk us through it in this book, because right now, I mean, Elisa, this is like the perfect time. People are looking for meaning. The collective
Mm-hmm.
pause of the pandemic, all the ways that we numbed our feelings, from being insanely busy to staying in super high demanding jobs and making all the money and traveling all the time, we could not use those things to numb. So the number of people who have written to me and come to me, and people in my therapy practice,
Yes.
basically being like, I'm losing my mind. Like, I'm losing it. And people even who didn't have what I knew to be as like real addiction issues were having circumstantial
Mm-hmm.
addiction situations because they felt so trapped, and then had to face either the state of their marriage or the fact that they don't, those whispering questions that you mentioned before, right? Is this what I should be doing? Do I really love this person? Do I want to live here? Do I want to stay doing what I'm doing? It was such a time of, I don't know if it's an invitation, it's a reckoning, it's a really, really good time for anyone who is seeking meaning, and you want your hand to be held through the process, because that's what this book does. It's Soulbriety. You guys can get it everywhere, anywhere books are sold. There's more, but I just want to inspire people to go buy it. I wanted to ask you about trauma, because what I'm also seeing that a lot of folks in my crew who've been able to sort of kind of outrun their trauma with busyness and other things,
Mm-hmm.
that a lot of people are now facing, and a lot of people are traumatized from their experience in the pandemic. So,
Yes.
to you, what does trauma mean? How to spot it? And what to do to treat it?
So trauma is really first of all, it's subjective. Everybody's experience is going to be different. It's not about the event that happened. Oftentimes people will minimize, there wasn't an assault, or this didn't happen or that didn't happen. And the truth is, it's not about the event itself. It's about how we are showing up in the present moment, in our experiences now, when we can't get past those emotional triggers, those physical symptoms, that sensation in our body. So it's interfering in the present. It's not about what actually happened. We're never going to be able to change the circumstance of what happened, but what we can do is heal ourselves so we can show up in a way that is going to be healthy and present in the moment. So that's for starters. There's different kinds of trauma. There's acute trauma, there's chronic trauma, and there's complex trauma. An acute trauma would be a one-time event, a car accident, an assault, something of that nature. Then a chronic trauma might be something like being bullied in school, or a divorce and now you have to go split between both parents, or you have a narcissistic abusive boss and you have to go into work every day, right? So these are things that over time will couple on top of one another and create chronic trauma. And then there's complex trauma, which is basically a combination of both of them. And so if you imagine that you have this window of tolerance of how much you can take, because remember, our bodies are meant to self-regulate. We don't have to put a lot of time into healing every little thing that happens. We have this ability to self-regulate. So within that ability, let's call that our window of tolerance, we can go up and down very quickly and we will recalibrate. So for instance, you're walking down the street and there's a garden hose and you jump really quickly because you think it's a snake. And then a couple of seconds later, you're like, oh, hose, keep going. But you had this sort of escalated reaction, And then
Mm-hmm.
very quickly you were able to keep walking. And that didn't interfere in your day because you stayed within that window of tolerance. When something traumatic happens to you, it's outside of that window of tolerance. It's something so overwhelming that you cannot compute it in your brain in real time. You
Mm-hmm.
cannot make sense of it. It is something that's never happened before and unimaginable. You can't break it down. And so your memories don't get laid down in the same way and they don't get integrated. And immediately, our reptilian brain will want to go into our survival, a fight, flight, or freeze.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can't fight back and if we can't flee, where does that energy of that adrenaline and that cortisol and all of those neurotransmitter energy, where does that go? It gets stored on a cellular level in our body. And until we release it, it will manifest itself and look like lots of different things, symptoms, anxiety, depression. And as you started with, we'll want to numb it out with
Mm-hmm.
any addiction or any form of addiction or anything that we can reach for outside of ourselves to have even a moment of feeling better. And everything that's external has an expiration date. If we're not doing the inside work, that guy, that relationship, those pair of shoes, those all have expiration dates on them and they're not meant to be long-term solutions.
Yeah, well, I love the way that you just broke that all down and laid it all out. I think that a lot of trauma survivors, there's so much self blame and guilt, and why can't I handle it, and what's wrong with me, and why can't I remember? Like, not understanding that traumatic memories are not the same as non traumatic memories,
Correct.
as you so clearly laid out. And that's why it's so difficult if people have to go to court and they're trying to prosecute
Yes.
someone who assaulted them, and
Yes.
how they get torn to shreds because they can't exactly remember the order things happen in, or some things just get blocked out altogether because that's your
Yes.
mind protecting you. I remember when Vic and I got held up at gunpoint, and that was one of those experiences that
Mm.
was a one-time thing, not imaginable, totally terrifying. And I actually just disassociated in the moment. Like I could see, I was floating above the scene and I could literally see the top of my own head, which is like the weirdest thing. And obviously I
Mm.
did a bunch of trauma work to come back from that experience. And thank God neither one of us was harmed in that. I understood it because I was already a psychotherapist, but to
Mm-hmm.
experience that kind of trauma where whatever's happening is literally too much for
Yep.
your brain to deal with, where the whole disassociating, I mean, the mind is just so brilliant to protect us from like cracking up completely, and then of
Correct.
course we have to do the work of healing that and understanding that. But I love how much information and psychoeducation you also have in this book, but you're making it very accessible. So it's not like reading a textbook, it's like understanding it because you're sharing your stories and sharing other people's stories. So I just appreciate the time, energy, and effort that you put in to do this. And I really do feel, like you just feel like the moment for Soulbriety, for this book, its moment is right now in our
Mm.
world. And you couldn't necessarily have known that, but it was I believe, your dharma to write this book when you wrote this book. Because we do need a guide and something that people can literally pick up the book and be like, okay, step one, this is where I'm starting, which is super helpful. How was the process for you of writing a book? I'm just curious because, first time author and all.
So effing hard.
Totally.
Just want to get that out there, kids, if you're thinking about writing a book. It's interesting because there are a lot of people that I know that are already out there teaching their material or their beliefs. And so they sit down to write a book and they have a structure because they understand what it is that they want to teach or tell. So initially when I sat down, I thought the same, but I didn't have really exactly that, because I had been doing it with myself and my clients, but it wasn't the same. I was writing with a coach and she kept saying, you need to put an outline together. And I just kept saying, I can't. I cannot put an outline together. I'm just going to keep writing stories. I essentially worked in the entertainment industry for 15 years. I represented actors and writers and directors and read tens of thousands of movie scripts. And that's what I knew how to do. I knew how to write story.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wrote stories and stories and stories and stories and stories. And then finally, like through my storytelling, I was able to see the connection. And that's when we started to write the outline. And it was completely backwards from what she knew to be sort of the path through. But there was a combination of this is the quote unquote way you do it, and me always being the outlier of but there must be another way. And doing it in the way that I needed to get it out and have it come from a really, like you were saying, it was my soul story that I was
Mm-hmm.
sharing, my soul journey that I was sharing. And that is so cyclical and not a straight line, not linear,
Right.
that it had to come out through my storytelling. And so, yeah, there was no other way to do it. In fact, Kelly and I were now going to teach a class on it because we learned so much in the process as well with one another.
It's so interesting. I think everyone who's ever written a book, even when you think you know so much, you learn so much about yourself, but also
Yes.
about what you're writing about. Tell everyone, where can they find you? Where can they buy your book? Tell me all the things.
You can find me on Instagram at Dr. Elisa Hallerman, and you can check out my website at drhallerman.com and learn more about what we do there.
So exciting. And your book, they can buy it anywhere fine books are sold, correct?
You can buy it anywhere books are sold right now. And yes, and then it will be delivered to you December 6th.
It's very
Don't you
exciting. You
love the
guys, it's,
cover?
I do. It's Soulbriety, a plan to heal your trauma, overcome addiction, and reconnect with your soul, people. If this is calling to you, go get this book. Thank you so much for being on, my friend. I really appreciate you.
Oh, I really appreciate and love you dearly. Thank you so much, Terry.